Okay, good evening, friends. We're continuing in Masechta Nedarim, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. We're dealing with the Shaila of Rami Bar Chama on Yud Aleph Amud Beis, where if somebody says Harei Alai Kibasar Zivchei Shlamim, and we know that Basar Zivchei Shlamim La'achar Zrikas Hadam is mutter. So, what do you mean? Do you say Bi'ikarei Kamadfis? That you're matfis in the essential status of the carbon. The essential status of the carbon is davar hanadar, or do we say behetera kamatfis? You're being matfis now. So let's start again from Amar Ravina Tashma. Kechalas aroin, like the chala of Aaron. The chala of Aaron is regular chala. Now that is not a davar hanadar, even though the Ran says that it becomes asur b'kriyas shem, but it's not asur to everyone. It's not asur to kohanim, so it's called davar ha'asur, or uktrumase. Likewise, truma is effective with an amira, so it's davar ha'asur. When you say it should be chala or truma, then it's chal. But it's not asur to everyone. Kohanim allowed to eat it, so it's not a davar hanadar, it's a davar ha'asur. But we're making a diak, ketrumas lachmei toida. But like the truma of the lachmei toida, the toida requires 40 loaves. 40 loaves. The netziv, by the way, there's a beautiful netziv that explains why do you have to bring so many loaves with the carbon toida? Because if you have to bring so many loaves, you're going to have to invite people. And the inyan of haida is necessary to be moideh barabim. So therefore, if you say and want to be madfis like lachmei toida, so the halacha is that it's effective. Lachmei toida asar. Now, lachmei toida in general, when is a person mafresh to lachmei toida in terms of its relative to the carbon? The lachmei toida don't become mutter until you sprinkle the dam. You hear this? The lachmei toida, now, you could be mafresh it earlier, but typically you can't eat it until hafrashas adam. So typically the lachmei toida are separated. The lachmei toida are separate after zrikas adam. By the way, the trumas lachmei toida, you have 10 of each of the 4 types of breads. One of each goes to the kohen. So if you're matfisid in trumas lachmei toida, now trumas lachmei toida is davar hanador. Why is it davar hanador? Because it's kachim. You see, truma is not kachim. Truma is something that once you're mafresh it's mutter to the kohen. But trumas lachmei toida is kachim. The trumas lachmei toida is kachim that becomes mutter at zrikas hadam. So the Gemara is medayik. Ha ketrumas lachmei toida aser. The trumas lachmei toida la'achar zrikas damim hi. The trumas lachmei toida is after you sprinkle the blood. Zok the ran. Trumas lachmei toida la'achar zrikas damim hi. The kivan the lachmei toida lo sharu ba'achila ad la'achar zrika. Since the lachmei toida do not become permitted to eat until after you sprinkle the blood. Lama yitremu oisam koidam lachein. Why would you take off the truma before? You can take off the truma. There could be such a case where you take off the truma. It's just that, why would you? Why would you? Umidik tani aser, the fact that it says aser shmamina debi karan kamadfis. We see from here that you're madfis in the ikar. Okay. Says the Gemara, so this is a Rabbi karan kamadfis, that you're madfis in the essential state. Says the Gemara, no, don't be medayik. That trumas lachmei toida, the neder is chal. Ema ketrumas halishka aser. Rather say like the trumas halishka it's aser. What's the trumas halishka? Says the Ran, Ela ema ketrumas halishka aser. Trumas halishka shahayu tarmin mimois halishka. The trumas halishka is the tithes that they took off from the money in the chamber. Umamalan shalish kupais, and they filled up 3 baskets. That means like this. By the way, I don't know, usually every year about either 30 or 60 days before Purim, we start Masechta Megillah. Either we do a blot a day or an Amud a day. So I gave the signal, okay, we start today. Today's Yud Daled Teves. In any event, in Masechta Megillah talks about that every Jew would contribute a machzas hashekel towards the public karbanos. They would put in a special chamber, but that was more than enough to cover the karbanos. And 3 times a year, the kohen would come in and with like a basket and take off like a separation. And from those 3 baskets that they would take out, 3 times a year, they would be makar of the karbanos. So that is like tzedakah money. That is money that is pledged. It's a davar hanador. So if you are matfis on that and you say ketrumas halishka, then in fact it's aser. But trumas lachmei toida would be mutter. So the Gemara says, really? Avol trumas lachmei toida mai mutter. But then you'll say trumas lachmei toida, since it's after zrikas hadam. So then it's mutter because you're matfis it right now. Lisni lachmei toida. Then why would the Brisa say that chalas aroin uktrumasai mutter? Why don't we say a bigger chiddush? Not only if you're matfis in regular truma, which is davar ha'asur, is it not a neder, but even if you're matfis in lachmei toida. In other words, avol trumas lachmei toida mai mutter lisni lachmei toida v'koshekain trumasai. Why talk about a case of truma? Talk about trumas lachmei toida and certainly regular truma. Says the Ran, Lisni trumas lachmei toida v'kolzkein trumasai v'havi rabusa tvei. That would be a much bigger chiddush. Mishum demei kara nesra trumas lachmei toida beneder. The chiddush would be that even though essentially trumas lachmei toida is davar hanador, but since right now it's mutter, so the neder is not effective. So, says the Gemara, no, hakamash malon trumas lachmei toida trumasai. The chiddush is when it says trumasai, it doesn't just mean regular truma that you take off, 1/50th. Trumasai includes trumas lachmei toida. Says around trumasai, he kalamer bechlal uk trumasai diktani. He mishum dahave ketruma legabe zarim. In other words, when the Brisa says uketrumasai, it doesn't just mean truma. It refers to trumas lachmei toida as well. That's answer number 1. Answer number 1 is that the diuk is not to be medayek for trumas lachmei toida. The diuk is to be medayek for trumas halishka, but taka trumas lachmei toida, it would not be an effective neder. V'ibai sema, and if you want, you could say trumas lachmei toida nami koidem zrikas damimhu. The case of trumas lachmei toida is where you were mafresh to trumas lachmei toida before the zrikas hadam. So right now it's a davar hanodar. You don't have a raya mei kara kamafis. It's talking about a case where you're mafresh to trumas lachmei toida before the zrikas hadam. Kagain, for example, the afreshinu belisha. For example, you separated it while it was still being kneaded. The Ran Taka says that it could have said you separated it after you baked it, before you sprinkled the blood. But it picked a case where you separated while you were kneading it. What's an example? The Gemara continues, V'chihada Amar Rav Tuvi Bar Kisna, like Rav Tuvi Bar Kisna taught, Amar Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, Lachmei Toida. The Lachmei Toida, remember we said Lachmei Toida, you have to bring 40 loaves. 10 of each of the 4 types. What if when you baked it, instead of baking it with 40 loaves, you baked it with 4 loaves? Basically, you combine the 10 loaves of each type into one big loaf. So the halach is Amar Shmuel, lachmei toida she'afan ba'arba chalois, lachmei toida, you baked it with 4 chalois, yatsa, your yatsa. Ay v'hachsiv arbam, it says 40, and you only did 4. La mitzvah, 40 is preferable, but it's not ma'akev. Ay v'haboy lemishkal truma but you need to take off truma. And if you baked it, you see, if you baked 10 loaves, you could just give one. If you baked 10 loaves of each, you could give one to the kohen. But if you baked just 4 total loaves, how are you giving one to the kohen? If you're going to say, well, you took 1 loaf for everything, so out of the 4 loaves you baked, you took 1 for the truma that you're required to give for everything. But we learned in the Mishnah, echad mikol karban, 1 from each carbon, which we interpret to mean shalayita mikarban al chaveroi. You can't take from 1 loaf for the other type of loaves. There's revuchim and challah and matzah. You can't take from one for the others. Elamai, you say, well, I took a shtickle I baked 4 big loaves and I took a cheftza from each of the 4. V'chitema deshakal prusa mikol chad v'chad. If you're going to say he took a piece from each one, v'hatnan, but we learned in the Mishnah, echad, it says 1, shalayita prusa. You can't take a shtick, can't take a piece, you have to take 1 whole thing. So you know what you did? Ela da'afrashinu belisha. You separated it when you were kneading it. Meaning, when you were kneading it, you needed 10 doughs for each, and then, let's say 10 matzah doughs, 10 challah doughs, 10 revuchim doughs. You gave 1 of the doughs to a kohen, and then you took the other 9 and you rolled it together as 1 big loaf. Okay? So that means you were makdim the trumas lachmei toida belisha, even before the zrikas hadam. Says the Gemara, the shakel chada me chametz, you took 1 of chametz, v'chada min chalais, and 1 from chalais, v'chada min rakikim, and 1 from rakikin, v'chada min revucha, and 1 from revucha. Let's see the Ran. Ba'arba chalais, arba mine chalais, there are 4 types of chalais. Aiva ksiv arbaim, dahavu arba'a minin, there are 4 species of bread, chametz, chala, rakikin, or revucha. Aiva tnan v'hikriv echad mikol karban, kalaymar, mikol min umin, from each and every species. V'alfinan b'gzeira shava, we learn out from gzeira shava, the echad me'eser ka'amar. Echad means, we learn out from gzeira shava, 1 out of 10. V'havalu arba'im, and they're 40. Meaning the Ran is bothered that, what does it mean that you need to take truma? The Gemara says you need to take truma, and it can't be you took 1 of the whole thing, because we learned in the Mishnah, 1 from each karban. You need to take 1 from each min, and 1 from each min we learn out means 1 out of 10. Says the Ran, the shakal chadam and chamet she'asa eser chalos, you made 10 loaves mikol min. The achar shefrishan echad mikol min, after you separated 1 from each min, lash tisha shall kol min, you needed 9 of each min. V'asa chala achas, you made 1 big chala mikol tesha v'tesha, from each group of 9. Says the Gemara, Lema ketanai. Let us say it is a machlokes tanaim. Let us say what is a machlokes tanaim. L'chayra, let us say whether the intention is whether you mean lifnei zrikas damim or not. We just said 2 answers. Answer number 1 is trumas lachmei toida is taka mutter, and the case of the diuk of ha truma is the trumas halishka would be aser, but trumas lachmei toida would be mutter because he probably means la'achar zrikas hadam. Or the case is kaidem zrikas damim. Let us say this is a machlokes tanoim, and we're going to explain what this means exactly, that it's a machlokes tanoim. Harei olai kibachar. Let's say somebody says, I want this piece to be aser like a bachar. Rabbi Yaakov Oiser, Rabbi Yaakov Asers, Rabbi Yehuda Mater. And Rabbi Yehuda Maters it. Now, what's the case? Inema lefnei zrikas damim. If you say explicitly before the zrikas hadam, my time of demand shari. What's the reason for the opinion that it's mutter? Vila achar zrikas damim. And if you say explicitly after my time of demand asar, so it must be elalav demachis basar bachar. There's a piece of bachar in front of you, umachis basar, and deheich gabe, and there's another piece of meat in front of you. Va'amar zekaze, and you say this should be like this. And the question is, it's talking about achar zrikas hadam, but do you mean that it should be like the status of the bachar right now after zrikas hadam, or do you mean me'ikarai? Let's see the Ran. Lema katanoi. Let's see if we can figure out this Ran. I lifnei zrikas damim. Let us say it's a machlokes tanoim. If before zrikas damim, kolomer sha'amar came befeirish. V'nira be'enai. The bedinhu the have a matzah akshuye. The truth is, it could have asked, "Iba oimer harei alai kibachar stama." If you say harei alai kibachar stam, my time of demand shari. What's the reason of the man amar that it's permitted? Dafilu iamrinan de behetera kamatfes. Because even if you want to say your matfes beheter, kol sha'amar stam. Beikarai kamatfes da tnam b'masnisan chatas toida shlamim aser. V'loy daikinon mina besugin. We're not medayek to be ikar kamatfes. Ela aidi deboy lameimar ila achar zrikas damim my time of demanda asar. Nakanami ila fnei zrikas damim my time of demanda shari. Avalu adin the stama nami kasha. Meaning like this. Even if you didn't say lefnei zrikas dam, we would still ask, why would anybody say it's mutter? Meaning, if you say, I want it to be like a bachar lefnei zrikas hadam, of course it should be aser. But the Ran is saying, even if you didn't say explicitly you want it to be like the status of the karm before zrikas hadam, also we feel it should be aser. If you just say this should be like a karban, then you definitely mean before zrikas hadam. If you say after, meaning what we're trying to say is, when a person says that something should be like a karban, how do we interpret his words? Does he mean that it should be like a karban before the zrikas hadam, or it should be like a karban la'achar zrikas hadam? The Ran just explains, and the Ran clarifies that if a person just says this should be like a karban before the zrikas hadam, it should for sure be aser. Even if a person just says this should be like a karban, and he doesn't explicitly say before zrikas hadam, it should also be aser, because we're going to say in an upcoming Mishnah, if you say this should be like a chatas, a toida, shlamim, it's aser. Even though you didn't explicitly say before zrikas hadam, because we assume when you say karban, you mean the essential state of the karban. The shaila is where you don't refer to the karban, you don't say the name of the karban, you just say this permitted meat should be like that meat over there, which happens to be a karban. And by this case of bachar, we find it's machlokes whether do you mean that it should be like its essential state or like its state now, la'achar zrikas hadam. And that's really the shaila of Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama's shaila is where you have a piece of mutter meat and a piece of zivchei shlamim, and you say this should be like this. So the Gemara is saying it should be a machlokes tanoim. It's a machlokes Rabbi Yaakov Oiser, because Rabbi Yaakov seems to say you go like the essential state of the bachar, and Rabbi Yehuda matters, because Rabbi Yehuda says we go like its current state. But that's only it's not talking about where you say the name of the carbon. Like the Gemara started off on Yer Alpha Amud Beis. If you say beferish la'achar zrikas hadam, it's not going to work. And if you say like a shlomim, the Ran now is being mechadish, it also would definitely be asar. Because we see in a later Mishnah that when you label the name of the carbon, if you say, my permitted meat should be like a chata, should be like an asham, you definitely mean like the essential state of the carbon, namely before the zrikas hadam. So at this step, we're setting it up that the Shail Rami Bar Chama is machlokes Tanam. And ultimately, the Gemara is going to say no. Everyone says that you could say, you want to see the Gemara just quickly, the Gemara says, Loi dekuli amal lefnei zrikas damim. Everybody agrees it's before the zrikas hadam. Or, by the way, either you said before the zrikas hadam, or just stam. So then why would Rabbi Yossi matter? Because it says, ki yidar neder. Hatfasa only works on the type of neder, iser neder, that you have to activate. But if it automatically comes because it's a bachar, that's not considered a davar anodar, even though the iser is a davar anodar. Mendy wants to say that he was thinking that he knows it, no?
The whole Gemara, we can't talk about the matzah to bachar, right? This is one of the matzah to bachar. It's not a davar anodar at all.
Loi dekuli amal lefnei zrikas hadam. I tell them on the Sharia. Markra ki yidar ad sheyidar b'davar anodar la'afuke b'char de davar asarhu. So what's the pshat on the other man damar? Uman da asar amar kra lashem l'rabbeis davar asar. What does that mean? That's a chiddush because this whole sugya we're talking about, the whole Gemara hatfas only works b'davar hanodar, not b'davar asar. Uman da asar amar kra lashem l'rabbeis davar asar. Uman da shari lashem ayav. Let me boile l'madvis b'chatas v'asham. So the Gemara basically is going to introduce the idea that maybe hatfasa works b'davar asar. But I mean, how much can we do next week's Gemara? You know? Okay. I guess yeah. Okay, we'll hold it over here. Rabbi say